Hey guys, this is Bert. Thanks for tuning in. I'm creating a small tutorial set on getting started with Unreal Engine. I've been there at the beginning. I've struggled in trying to understand how it all works. So this is my attempt on helping you guys to understand everything, which took me a few years. I'm gonna make a few tutorials out of this, and this is gonna be the very first one of a small series. And if there are any questions at any given moment, feel free to send me a message or comment down below. I'll make sure to also add some links in the description that can definitely help you out while watching this video. And for the rest, what's important to know, it might be good to already install Unreal Engine 5.7 or 5.8. To be honest, it can also be 5.6 and everything in front of it. If you don't know how to do so, then no worries. I'll help you out on that one as well. So let's get started. I will cover, at least what will I cover for this video. We're first gonna learn on getting started with Unreal Engine. Out of this, we will be first creating a project from scratch so that you know, as well as I do, where to go, what to click, and how to continue forward from. We're gonna learn, or at least I'm gonna hope and teach you how to understand the viewports of Unreal Engines a little bit. We're gonna set up a folder structure because things can get quite messy quite fast. Base naming conventions. That's also one of the things that I will link down in the description below. It's always good to have a good naming convention. You'll see later on. Setting up a floor, aka we need something to walk upon. Input actions. And then from controller to character. By the end of this tutorial, you should be having a very small floor where we can walk upon with a quickly made character. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Let me know if you want some extra information or whatever. Let's get going. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be doing right now is opening up our Epic Games launcher. And on the top right corner you will find Launch Unreal Engine 5.7. If you're first met with this view, don't be alarmed. You can just click on Unreal Engine on the left side. From there onwards you can just go to Launch Unreal Engine 5.7.4. If for whatever reason you haven't installed Unreal Engine yet, you can always go to your library and then click the engine versions and install whichever version you prefer. Now for me it's just gonna click Launch Unreal Engine 5.7.4. We click on it and we wait for a second. You will be greeted with a new window which is gonna be loading our first element. The first window that we see at the moment, or at least that we will be greeted with, is going to be the window for the engine creation, or at least the project creation. The first project that we're going to click on is, or at least the first thing that we're going to be doing is click on New Project. And on this new project you have the option to choose for whichever type of production you're going to be working with. Well, since I'm teaching game design and how to create video games and environments, let's start with the games version at least. You make sure to select games. We're not gonna click on the intro to Unreal. We're gonna be using a blank project. The less clutter that you have in your project, the better that it will be. So we're gonna go with a blank project. We make sure to select a proper folder. By default, you should be seeing Unreal project somewhere in your documents. But I highly recommend to pick a folder location or a project folder location. With a naming convention that's not too long. The thing is, Unreal Engine only has a certain or a set amount of characters that it could have in the name or the project path. Be careful with those. The longer the naming convention becomes, or the longer the project path becomes, the worse it gets. So take preferably your documents somewhere in Unreal Projects folder, and then we're going to be naming the project. We can call this one Tutorial 1. And then we click Create. And then we have to wait a bit for the engine to load. Okay, so we are back. Unreal Engine has loaded and you should be greeted with the following screen. By default, you will open, the moment that you've opened a fresh new Unreal Engine project, you will see, or you'll be greeted with a viewport, which is well, your actual viewing, everything that's inside your 3D scene. You will be able to see here. Now, you just noticed how I rotated my camera around. You can do that by right-clicking with your mouse and just moving the mouse around. You also have the option to left-click to move back and forth and look a bit around you. You can also both left-click and right-click to pan your camera up and down and a little bit to the left and to the right according to your viewport or how your camera is placed. You could also right-click and WASD. Depending on whichever you press, you go forward, backwards, left, or right. If you're like, oh no, I'm moving so slow, well, there's also the option to actually change your camera speed. You can do that by clicking on the top right corner and then just changing it manually, making you move faster and slower. Or what you could also do is, while you are moving, let me turn that off again, while you're moving, scrolling with your mouse. That also makes you move slower or faster depending on the direction that you're scrolling in. Now, what is it that we see inside of this viewport? If you are curious to know what is all inside of your 3D scene, luckily there is also a different window for that. That is the outliner window. On the right, well, it's not a window, it's a tab actually. On the right top corner you will see this outliner tab with a few folders in it, a directional light, exponential height fog, landscape, etc. Now the thing is, every single one of these objects that you can see is an element inside of our 3D scene. Now, once you click, for example, on the directional light, you might see it being highlighted or highlit. It's being highlighted inside of our scene. As you can see, we also have the moon there. Now, what is this? This is our gizmo. With the gizmo, we could potentially move our object inside of our 3D scene, moving in all three axes, X, Y, or Z, if you click correctly. If you press spacebar, you can also rotate it. Now, curiously or coincidentally, moving our object, in this case our directional light, in X, Y, or Z doesn't change anything for the light. But rotating it will change our sun's direction. This is sometimes what you want to use if you have a certain lighting setup that you want to go for. Or if you want it to be maybe a little bit more night, or day, or even midday, or etc. Depending on the different settings, you can go for a different lighting setup. Now, that being said, there are a few different things in here as well. We're not gonna cover them all since this class is gonna mainly go over starting a new level, starting out fresh. If you click on the directional light, you do see a new tab opening up, your details. The details panel itself has all the information, all of the values which correspond and are important for your actor or your object to be used, or that these values will influence your object. That's important to know because sometimes you want more sunlight. Sure, if you want more sunlight, you just up the intensity value. Maybe you want to change your source angle, temperature, etc. All different things that we can do. Now the thing is, these are not elements that I will go over in this tutorial. Maybe I will make a different video later on this. But there's also plenty of resources online about all of the different settings. For example, for a directional light, for your skylight, you can always take a look as well at the Unreal documentation. I will make sure to link it in the description down below. If you're curious, everything is inside of the Unreal documentation. But if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll make sure to answer as well, or try to answer as well on the video. Or maybe on the next one. Now, that being said, I now want to create a new level. This new level, this is just a preview, right? I want something that is of us. So how can I now do that? You press Ctrl Spacebar to open up your content drawer. I highly recommend that if you are working for the very first time in Unreal Engine, to make sure that you dock this tab in layout. How can you do that? On the right side of the content drawer, you can see dock in layout. Once you have done that, you will now see that it's nicely implemented inside of our engine. Now, this should be everything that's inside of the content browser. Now, you might wonder, but what is this thing? Sure. The content browser itself what you notice is you have a few tabs. You have favorite, tutorial 1, which is coincidentally the case of this video, the name of this video, and this class project. And you also have collections. The one that's important for now will be the tutorial underscore 1. That is everything that we have inside of our project, or that we've added or created inside of Unreal Engine that we might or might not want to display in our 3D viewport, we can find here. Now, it's important to make sure that your folder structure is kept clean. What does that mean? When we are working with, in this case, a full game project, I highly recommend to make a few extra folders. Out of the top of my head, a few folders that we will always be using, so make sure to click on content. Then you go into the big empty space, you right click and you say new folder. We name this folder levels. I also highly recommend that we create a new folder and we name that one blueprints. Maybe not super relevant for this class, but maybe for other ones. And just to know how to set up a proper folder structure, create a new folder once again, materials. And it's maybe also important to have a folder for meshes if we make some or potentially import some. Again, don't worry about this. This is stuff for later on, but let's call this one meshes. Now, we're gonna double click and open up our levels folder. And here we're gonna right click and create a level. Once that we've created a level, it's important to also set up a proper naming convention. Now, there are every single person has a different naming convention. It's important to stick to the naming convention that if you are working in a company that your lead tells you to, or that the company adheres to always work in that naming convention. If it's for your own project, you could decide on a project-based naming convention. But I always recommend to work with a very common naming convention that feels natural to you. For me, the most common naming convention would be specifically for a level to use a prefix L underscore, aka level underscore, my first level. Once that we've done that, you notice that now the new object is being made inside of our content browser. And what we also notice is that there is a small star icon there. Now, the thing is that star icon means that it's yet unsaved. You also notice that we have that star icon on the top right corner. Let me quickly highlight that for you guys. On the top right corner next to the level's name. Now, the thing is, we're first gonna open up by double clicking our newest level. It will ask if we want to save the basic template level that they've given us. I don't think that we'll use it anymore. So we're just going to say no by unchecking the checkbox. And then we say save selected. You will be greeted with, once again, a fully, or at least the very first time, a fully black screen or viewport. What does that mean? As you can see in the outliner, nothing is inside of this level. It's important to know that you will start fully blank. There's nothing there. So what's next? Well, obviously we have to set up our base. How do we do that? Or at least what I mostly do of the time is, there are a few things that we will always need. You go and you click on the place actor or quickly add to the project. Where can you find that? On the top left corner, you will find a cube with a big plus and a drop down. You click on it and then you look for lights. There you will find a directional light. You click on it. And then you'll notice that our directional light gets spawned into the world. Now, on the right hand side, you'll notice that the location is being set to 820 by 0 and 0. We have a certain rotation set up for 0, for 46 or negative 46, and we also have a scale set up. Now, this does not make a lot of sense because scaling a light does nothing. Now, I highly recommend to reset all of these values by clicking on the arrow icon. I would do the same thing for the scaling of the light. And I will also reset the rotation of our light. Now, you might wonder, but where did my light go? I don't see my icon anymore. Don't worry, you can always double click on your outliner and then you will find your icon once again. Now, what is important to note, or at least what is important to see right here and right now, you can see that we now have our icon, aka we have our object or our actor inside of the world, and we also have an arrow. The arrow is the direction that the light is shining in. So we're gonna rotate it slightly. Now, what I've also seen is that we are now at -60, we started at -46. Practically we could have kept the rotation as it was. That being said, we now have a light setup. We're gonna now also make some sort of a floor. You might wonder, but how do we make a floor? Well, just gonna quickly showcase how to make a floor. You're gonna go to selection mode on the top left corner. Here we are gonna go into brush editing mode. Either you press Shift 7 or you just go to the drop down and you press brush editing. Oh, my apologies. I meant modeling. There we go. That's the mode that I was looking for. Now, that being said, what we're going to be doing right now, we're going to make sure that we're in the Create tab. And here we're going to look for the cube grid. Now, why am I using a cube grid? You'll notice instantly. You click on it. You'll notice a grid being shown and inside of our level, right? Inside of our 3D space. But this is just a preview. What we're going to be doing right now is you click and drag with the left mouse button and you create some sort of a view of a floor, just a square floor. 1700 by 1700 is more than fine enough. Now, it's important to note as well that one Unreal unit, or in this case 1700 Unreal units, corresponds to 100 equals to 1 meter. So that means that we are now creating a platform of 17 meters by 17 meters. It's important to know that. Now, once you have selected, you will press E. The moment that you've pressed E, you will see a mesh. This is what we call a mesh, or some geometry show up. Perfect. This is what we like. This is what we need. Once that we have done this, we will press accept. Now, what does that do? We've now created, by the way, congratulations on that. We've created our first mesh. Now, if you now look into the outliner, it gives you static mesh actor. What does that mean? A static mesh actor is an object inside of our 3D scene which will not be moved. It's a mesh that is there to stay there. It's a static mesh. It doesn't move. Now, you notice that in our levels folder, we've also now created a _generated folder. You can take a look and you notice that we now have our cube grid there. Perfect. That means that we have it. What might now be important as well, and that's just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, you're gonna click on your directional light. Let's move it a bit upwards so that we can see where the arrow points towards. And what I want you to do is rotate your directional light until you have at least, well, in this case you can't do anything more, until you have 3 sides lit up. It's just important to note that when we have a mesh, we're working a 3D scene. It doesn't really pay off to have only 2 sides lit up, the top and the side. Make sure to try to have 3 different sides set up. Now, let's continue forward. What I'm gonna ask you to do now is press Ctrl-Shift-S. Now, what does that do? That saves all the unsaved assets that are open in our scene and that we've touched upon. That will actually save them out. So it's not just the scene, it's not just the mesh, it's everything, right? It's important, and try to get that into your fingers a bit. What I also highly recommend as we get started with stuff right now is to right click inside of your outliner and say create folder. The folder that we will be creating will be called blockout. We will click and drag our cube grid tool output in there. We create a new folder and we call that lighting. This is where we will move our lighting in. It's important. Right now it's only 2 things, but when you're working with a video game or when you're making a nice scene, it's important to keep everything as nicely and neatly ordered as possible. Otherwise, you might end up looking for something in a scene with 10,000 different actors, all with practically the same name, and that's gonna be quite difficult. So, in this case, make sure to nicely create a folder structure inside of your outliner as well. Okay, so the next step that we'll now be doing is we will be creating a way to move a character. Now, how can we do that? It's a little bit more difficult than it used to be, but it's still quite acceptable. Now, how can we do that? You right click, let's now maybe state inside of, let's create a new folder for this. New folder, oh, it's not gonna be called new folder, right? We're gonna be calling it inputs. You open up the folder inputs and you right click. You right click and you go for the section input. There you will find input actions and input mapping context. Let us first start with creating some input actions. Now what does that mean? Let's first call and name it properly. Input action, and let's call it move. Input action move. Double click to open it up, and then you'll notice that this window pops up. I highly recommend, by the way, that while you're working inside of Unreal Engine, to specifically if you only have one screen, to always dock your extra windows inside, or at least on top, next to the level. I'm also gonna go back to selection mode to make sure we don't do anything wrong. So input action, move. Action description, let's give that a proper description. Let's call this, these actions will make our player move. Okay, so now that we've set that up, the next thing that we can do now is actually set up what type of action this is going to be. It's not going to be a boolean, so it's not going to be a trigger on or off. It's going to be an axis vector 2D. That means that we're going to have movement on either X or Y. We're not gonna jump into the, well, we're not gonna move, and we're not gonna add a jump just yet. That being said, so now that we've created this, we're gonna say save. Axis vector 2D. Now we're gonna start and create an input mapping context. So right click once again and go to input mapping context. IMC underscore, let's call this player move. You're gonna double click and open it up. And here we're gonna start adding some keys. So you make sure to open up the drop down default key mappings, and there you will find mappings. You press on the little plus icon, and then you will find now a section, or at least something that just states none. You click on none. There you will find our input action, the one that we've just created. We do that, and then you once again, you will have to open up the drop down button. You'll have to do that a few times, I'm afraid. And here you will now be able to set up how you want to move. Now, it's important to know that we will be moving with WASD. If you want to use the arrow keys or want to use a gamepad, feel free to do so. But for now, we're gonna keep it simple. We're gonna go with WASD. How can you now easily set that up? You press on the little keyboard icon, and then you press W. Now, once that you've done that, we can now continue forward, and we can now state, okay, so what is this? You're gonna open it up, and there it will now see like, okay, so triggers, we don't need a trigger. We don't need modifiers, and the settings behavior is fine as is. So now we know input action move, we do something with W. Now, the thing is, I also set WASD, so we're gonna also set those up. So we add 3 more options for keys to move with. WASD. You can open up every single one of them. Now we're gonna set up the next and upcoming ones. The S is gonna be our backwards moving. So what are we going to be doing? We're gonna be adding a modifier to it. So we're gonna add a little bit on the plus icon, and we're gonna call this a negate. AKA we're going to be multiplying with -1. So knowing that otherwise W will be moving us forward in the X direction, now we will be moving backwards in the X direction. Now, then we're gonna have D. It's important to know that left is gonna be the negative form of right. So we're gonna once again then go towards maybe first the right option. This is gonna be D. We're gonna click modifiers. And on modifiers, we're gonna say swizzle the input axis. Now, what does that mean? That means that instead of now we're gonna go from a forward moving, we're now gonna go to a leftwards moving. Or in this case, a rightwards moving, right? Positive Y. Now, that means that we now have to set up two modifiers on the actual A or left movement. And that's going to be the swizzle input axis and the negate. There we go. Then we're going to save, and then we have set up our input mapping context. So now that we have set up our input mapping context, we're gonna continue forward. So we've just set up the main movement. We're gonna close down both of these tabs, and we're gonna go to our blueprints. We're gonna create a new folder, and we're gonna name one character. We're going to right click, and we're gonna create a new blueprint class. It is important to know a few extra things. So, when we want to set up character movement and a character, we need a few things. We need to understand a player controller and a character actor. Later on, we'll also make sure to understand the game modes, but for now, player controller and the character. The player controller, or that is at least what you can see right here, the player controller is what we call the brain of the character. That thing will tell you this is the movement that you will be making. This is the action that you will be making. So keep that as some sort of an interpreter between the player and the playable character, or potentially a pawn. Now, that being said, let's first create our player controller. We call that one BP_my_controller. There we go. We open up the BP_my_controller. Once again, we dock it inside of our layout, and then you will be met with, once again, something that looks very similar to the very first windows that we saw. Now, you have a components tab, everything that is visible here inside of this blueprint. And we also have the My Blueprints. This is everything that's also inside of the blueprint, but here you can also find your variables, your macros, your functions, stuff for later on. Don't worry about that right now. What I want you to do is, at the top where your viewport is, you can also go to your event graph. In the event graph, you will be met with an event begin play and an event tick. Now, the thing is, the event tick, that's something that we don't have to look into right now. We can delete that one. The event begin play, the moment that our controller is spawned into our world, we will be running over everything that is connected to event begin play. Now you might wonder, how do I connect something to this? Because that doesn't make a lot of sense. Sure. Event begin play has an execution pin, meaning that the moment that the event begin play gets called, everything behind it will also be executed. Now, how can we set up our movement from the get-go? You right click and you look for enhanced input, there we go, enhanced input local player subsystem. That gives us this cool node. Out of that node, we drag from the pin that we have right here, so our return value, we drag add mapping context. You already remember we've created something called an input mapping context, right? This is going to be related to that. So we're going to connect our event begin play, the execution pin, to the execution pin of our add mapping context. Now that we have done that, we can also say, okay, so where do we have to assign this towards? Well, coincidentally, if you click to the mapping context, select asset, you will find input mapping context player move. Perfect. That is set up. We now have made our connection to, if we press Ctrl space once again, we have now created our connection to our input mapping context. Cool. Now, compile on the left top side. My apologies, I tend to do this out of habit already, so you'll notice the moment you work a bit more with Unreal, you'll press compile before you know. Now, what are we going to be doing? Well, we will now right-click anywhere, which is not on one of the nodes that's located there, and we will look for input action underscore move. If you don't see this node, then maybe you should first double check if the mapping context is set up properly and if you have compiled. If it still gives you a yellow question mark, that means that you haven't compiled yet. If it gives you a green check mark, that means that you did a good job. Now, that being said, our input action move has two outputs. One is an execution pin when it gets triggered, and one is an action value. Now, this action value actually holds our values, or at least our, well, if we're pressing WASD or not. What are we going to do? We're first going to click and drag out of the return node, and we're going to break the vector 2D. That gives us two separate axes, or at least two separate float values. This beautiful blue color means that we're using a structure. The green ones means that we're using floats. Thank you, Unreal Engine and Epic Games, for an awesome color code. That being said, out of this, we now need to tell it, okay, so these values will become movement. Now, how do we do that? First, you're going to right-click somewhere, and we need to say we're going to be using whatever character or pawn that we are trying to control. So, we're just going to say get controlled pawn. There we go. Out of this, we will now click and drag, and we will say add movement input. Click and drag, connect the execution pins, and then. Now, the thing is, the world direction, first we're gonna be making sure that we're moving forward. Quick remark, moving forward will always be in the X direction. Try to always adhere to that. So moving forward, gonna be in the X direction, so we set the X vector on 1. Then the scale is gonna be the output of our break vector. Then we're gonna do the exact same thing. We're gonna say add movement input. There we go. And we're gonna now connect the Y value. There we go. If you want to make this a bit more beautiful, you double click on the connection to create a reroute node. Makes it a bit cleaner to read afterwards. There is one more thing that we need to do before we can actually start with creating our character. Well, we're gonna make ourselves a game mode. We're gonna right click, say a new blueprint class, and now we're gonna create a new game mode base. You click on that and you state BP underscore my game mode. Double click. And then now we will open it up and you'll see on the right hand side now in the details panel. I recommend maybe close it down for a second and open it up once again, then we get a more compact view. If you want to go back to the previous blueprint, by the way, you just click open full blueprint. In here we will now state that we have a player controller class, and that will now be BP my controller. Now we still need to set up our default pawn class. First we're going to compile, and then we're going to go back to our content browser. We're going to right click here, we're going to say blueprint class, and we're going to create a character. We name it BP underscore my character. Open it up. Okay, so now that we have created a character, as you can see, we have once again a few different settings. The reason why we're using a character instead of a pawn is because a character comes with some more technology already inside of it, some more information inside of it. A pawn is really starting from scratch. Maybe we'll keep that till another tutorial. But for now, let's just continue forward with BP character. We're gonna make sure that we have a body to the character, and how can we do that? By adding a new component. You click on add, and then you look for cube. Let's call this one body. And we're going to scale the cube. So now we're gonna unlock the lock. And we're gonna change the cube. Let's say 0.5 in the x-axis, 0.5 in y, and 1.25 in z. Compile. Then we're going to duplicate. Oh, we're going to duplicate the body or the cube. And we're going to name this nose. Now we're going to move that a bit forward. And we're going to scale it downwards. 0.25, 0.25, and 0.5. Now, as you notice, or I hope that you noticed, 0.25, 0.25, and 0.5 is relative to what the scale is. Oh, never mind, it is not, because it's not parented. So we now see that we have 0.25, 0.25, and 0.5 set up. But if I would now click and drag it onto the body, and I then click on the nose, then we'll see to keep the exact same transformations or the exact same shape, it will now go to a scale of 0.5, 0.5, 0.4. And why is that? Because it is now looking relatively to the parent that it has and the scale of the parent. And the parent's already scaled 0.5, 0.5, 1.25. But for the nose, in this case, that means 1, 1, 1. And that is why it looks a little bit different if we now say 0.5, 0.5, 0.4. Because if I now would reset this to 1, 1, 1, we will be getting the exact same scale or the exact same shape as the nose, the body. Control Z. Control Shift S to save. Compile and save. Now that we've done this, we're gonna go back to our game mode. Maybe double check something. Did we properly set up? Yes. Make sure to always check that we're setting up the nose of our body into the X direction, right? Now, I've noticed one more thing as well, which I have apparently forgotten. What I want you to do is add two more things. Add a spring arm. There we go. We're gonna rotate the spring arm a teeny tiny bit. We're also gonna offset it to 500 in the target arm length. So rotation minus 50 in Y and target arm length 500. Then we're going to add a camera onto the spring arm. And we're going to reset the rotation so that it looks downwards onto the character. There we go. Compile and save. Now we're going to go back to our game mode. And in the game mode, we're going to be setting as default pawn class BP my character. Compile and save. Next up, you go inside of your level and you will be looking for a player start. Click and drag it out and place it somewhere onto our level. It doesn't really matter where, it just has to be on the floor. Control Shift S. Now that we've done this, we're gonna go to File. My apologies. We're going to go to Edit and we're going to go to Project Settings. In Project Settings, you will go to Maps and Modes. In Maps and Modes, you will change the default game mode to BP My Game Mode. Close. Save everything out. Press play. And you'll notice that we shift through the ground. That is not supposed to happen. Now, that's one way that we can fix this. Let's do it the easy way. Press Ctrl B after selecting your Cube Grid Output tool. So once again, select the Cube Grid Output tool, Ctrl B, double click. The thing is, it doesn't have any collision, or at least it doesn't have any complex collision. How can we check that? If you go to collision, or at least we go here, view, where are you? Simple collision, nothing's there. Complex collision, hey, it's there. So now what can we do is we scroll a bit downwards and there we will find collision complexity. We will now state use complex collision as simple. This is something for a different tutorial, but there are ways to go around this. The easiest way is to already from the get-go make sure that this is being generated, but by default that's been turned off. Now that being said, we can always circle back. I will make sure to add this in one of the upcoming tutorials as well. Since this is the first of many, I will make sure to take the time to explain a bit more as to why that happened. But for now, we should be able to press play. That now we have movement happening, but it's not properly working. Now, how to fix this? how to make sure that we now, when we press forward, we actually move forward. The thing is, my character's rotation starts in the negative Y. That means that if I press now positive W, which means going into the X direction, I'm gonna go to the right hand side. If I press A, I'm moving forward. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Now let's make it so that we adhere to our world's rotation. How do we do that? We go to BP character, you make sure that you've selected BP my character self, and in here you look for rotation. We make sure that use controller rotation jaw is turned off, and we also state orient rotation to movement. We compile and we test again, we press play. Okay, we're already moving into the right directions. We're already rotating into the right directions. But it would be nicer if we actually had a static camera, right? Moving with the character, but not rotating with the character. So, how to then change that? You go to your controller. My apologies. We go to the spring arm. And in the spring arm, we're gonna take a look at our camera settings. And we turn off inherit pitch, inherit yaw, and inherit roll. And if we now press play, we are able to move around our character without weird rotations happening, and we're always looking into the positive x-axis of our world. Okay guys, that was it for today. I hope that I was able to help you out. If not, if there are more topics that you would like me to cover in my series, or if there are some very specific things that you're thinking about, like, oh, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll gladly check it out, and maybe and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Bye bye, and thank you once again.